The sun is down, the house is quiet, and you are not as alone as you think. Welcome to Ghostly Tales. I'm your host, Mel, and these are stories meant for the dark and for those brave enough to listen to them.
The camping trip. I went camping with my dad when I was a kid, the kind of trip that felt simple and safe at the time. Just the two of us, a small tent, and a quiet spot deep in the woods. He had been camping his whole life and promised me there was nothing out there to be afraid of. That night started out normal. We ate by the fire, talked until it burned down to embers, and crawled into the tent while the woods settled around us. The sounds of insects and distant animals blended together until it felt like background noise. I was almost asleep when I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was my dad shifting beside me, but the sound came from outside the tent. Slow steps, circling us. I froze and listened. The footsteps stopped, then started again, crunching leaves just feet away from the thin fabric between us and whatever was out there. My dad whispered that it was probably a deer. I wanted to believe him. A few minutes later, something brushed against the side of the tent. Then came the scratching. Long, slow drags against the fabric. My dad sat up. The scratching stopped, then started again on the other side of the tent. We stayed completely silent. Then we heard it. A soft giggle, quiet and close enough that it felt like she was right next to us. A sound like that didn't belong in the deep woods. My dad did not say anything this time. He reached for the flashlight and turned it on, shining it against the tent wall. The giggling stopped instantly. The woods went so quiet it felt unnatural. That was when he told me to grab my shoes. We did not pack. We did not look around. We just ran for the truck, with the flashlight shaking in his hand. We drove away without speaking, both of us staring straight ahead, like saying it out loud would make it worse. The next morning, we went back in daylight to get our things. The woods looked harmless again. Birds were chirping. Our tent was half collapsed. Our bags were open and spread out like someone had gone through them. Food wrappers were scattered, but nothing was taken. The strangest part was the tent. Deep scratches ran along the sides, right where we had heard them the night before. My dad packed everything up without a word. We never went camping there again. Sometimes when I think about that night, I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed a little longer.
My childhood home. The house I grew up in was a place of pure survival. It was a beat-up, neglected old house that my dad never took care of. He spent his days drinking and angry, and because of that, a deep, heavy, depressive feeling hung over the entire place. There was a very dark atmosphere to that house, and I remember always feeling a distinct, paralyzing fear in certain rooms. But it wasn't just the tension of my dad's anger. The house itself felt active. Long after everyone had gone to bed and the house was supposedly sleeping, I would lie awake in my room and hear heavy, angry footsteps pacing up and down the hallway outside my door. There were days I would be walking through the house alone and doors would violently slam shut right in front of my face. Dark shadows seemed to linger in the corners of the rooms, accompanied by a sudden foul smell that would come out of nowhere, a rotting, oppressive odor that made the air feel completely toxic. Leaving that house the second I was old enough was the best feeling in the world. It felt like finally being able to breathe after years of suffocating. Once I got out, I rarely ever came back to visit. Years later, my father passed away, and I had to return to the house one final time to settle his things. the moment I stepped through the front door, it all came rushing back. The house was empty, but that same terrible smell would still come and go in waves, and I could hear the doors creaking open and shut in the distant rooms, as if the house was still restless. I didn't linger. I put the house on the market and sold it as fast as I possibly could. Driving away from it for the last time, knowing it was no longer mine and that I would never have to return, was the ultimate relief.
The night it knocked. I live in a house on the outskirts of a very old town. There is a lot of history here, and the land has always felt like there is more to it than meets the eye. One summer evening a couple of years ago, I was sitting in my living room relaxing when I heard 3 firm knocks on my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. In fact, I rarely get visitors here, especially late in the evening. Immediately, I felt uneasy. I walked over to the door and looked out the window beside it. The porch light illuminated the entire front porch, but nobody was there. Beyond that was only the stillness of a warm summer night. I had heard plenty of folklore about mysterious knocks at the door, and those stories immediately came to mind. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stood there listening, waiting to see if whoever, or whatever, had knocked would return. Nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing and moved on. As time passed, I mostly forgot about the experience. Then, winter came. One night in the dead of winter, I was lying awake in bed, unable to sleep. The house was silent. That's when I heard it again. 3 knocks. The exact same pattern. Only this time they sounded harder, more deliberate, almost violent. A wave of dread ran through me. I got out of bed and made my way to the front door. My heart was pounding as I looked outside. Again, there was nothing there. Just darkness and silence. That was the last time it happened. Years have passed, and I've never heard the knocks again. But I still think about them. I can't help wondering if they meant something, whether they were simply a coincidence or some kind of bad omen. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I find myself listening, waiting, wondering if one day I'll hear those 3 knocks again.
The Humming Lady. A few years ago, I worked the closing shift at a small grocery store on the edge of town. The store stayed open until midnight, but after about 10 o'clock, it was usually quiet. Most nights it was just me, a cashier, and a manager finishing up the last few hours. One rainy fall evening, around 11:15, a woman walked into the store. She appeared to be in her 60s and wore a long gray coat. Her hair hung damp around her face from the rain outside. The first thing I noticed was that she was humming. It wasn't loud, but in a nearly empty store, it echoed through the aisles. The tune was unfamiliar, and something about it felt unsettling. She wandered slowly through the store, humming the entire time. At first, I paid little attention to her. The cashier and I continued talking while straightening shelves near the front. Every so often, I would hear the humming drift from one aisle to another. Then, it stopped. The silence caught my attention immediately. Realizing I hadn't heard her for several minutes, I went to see if she needed help. I checked a few aisles and couldn't find her. When I returned to the front, I asked the cashier if she had seen the woman leave. She hadn't. I told the manager, and the 3 of us searched the entire store. Every aisle, both restrooms, the stock room, the break room. She was nowhere. What bothered me most was that none of us had seen her leave. The front registers faced the only public entrance and exit. Someone should have noticed. The next day, my manager reviewed the security footage. We watched the woman enter the store. We watched her wander through the aisles while humming. Then she turned down an aisle near the back of the building. She never appeared on another camera. She never walked back toward the entrance. She never left the store. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe there was a blind spot in the cameras. Maybe we somehow missed her leaving. That's what I tell myself. But every time I think about it, I remember that sudden silence. The humming was there one moment, gone the next. And so was she.
When my son was little, sleepwalking was a regular occurrence. I was used to waking up in the dead of night to gently shuffle him back to his room. But there is one night I will never forget. I'm already having a restless night, tossing and turning, when the distinct creaking of floorboards echoes from the hallway. He's up again, I think. Standing up, I wait for him to step into view. Sure enough, a small silhouette appears in the darkness. Instinct takes over. I slip out of bed to guide him back to safety. But as I close the distance, a cold wave of dread hits me. My stomach twists into knots. Something is wrong. The closer I get, the less sense it makes. Because he isn't coming into focus. He remains completely solid, an impenetrable shadow cutting through the dark. I rush forward, reaching out, and the figure simply evaporates into nothing. I stand there, entirely frozen. Was I sleepwalking? No, I'd been awake and restless for hours. Heart pounding, I tiptoe into his bedroom. He is sound asleep, buried under his blankets. I know what I saw, and I know I didn't imagine it. To this day, I can still feel the wrongness of that hallway. A blink of an eye. There have always been odd things that have happened in my home. Just like a lot of people, I have experienced odd sounds and moments where I thought I saw something. I always joked about ghosts, but I never thought too seriously about it. I was never even sure if I actually believed in them, because I thought most things could be explained away. There was one night in my home, however, that made me believe a lot more. I stayed up too late watching TV in the living room. All of the lights were out, except for the glow of the TV. When I finally decided to make my way into my bedroom, I was stubborn. Instead of turning on the lights, I walked down the dark hallway, using the flashlight on my phone to guide me. As I looked down toward the entryway to my bedroom, I thought I saw something black walk past the entry in a blink of an eye. I was a little startled, but I knew it was late and I was tired. I entered my bedroom, and as I shined the light towards the side of the room, I thought I saw the figure move. I saw something black and crouched down on the ground. I screamed and flipped on the light as fast as possible, but nothing was there. I have no idea if my mind was playing tricks on me that night, but I will always feel uneasy about that night. The scream. The first time I heard the scream, I was a child playing in my room. I grew up in a big, old house, and it had a lot of the typical noises that come with old houses. Creaking pipes, settling floorboards, the wind rattling the window panes, the kind of sounds you just get completely used to after a while. But this scream was not normal. It completely startled me. I stopped playing and just listened for a little while, but everything went dead silent again. I went into the living room, and my dad was just sitting there watching TV at a normal volume. You couldn't even really hear it from my bedroom. Then I went into the kitchen and asked my mom about it, but she didn't know what I was talking about and just brushed it off. I heard this same scream several times throughout my childhood. It always sounded like a woman who was a mix between angry and sad. Once, I had a friend over, and we were sitting in my room talking and giggling when we both heard it. She noticed it too, and it made me feel so validated. It was a relief to know I wasn't just hearing things. Eventually, as I got older, it stopped happening. I didn't think about it much anymore, and it just became a distant memory. Years later, I was an adult in my own home, getting ready for bed. The house was quiet, and as I started to crawl into bed, I heard the scream again. It was just as clear as it was when I was a kid, coming from somewhere inside the house. I instantly got that horrible gut feeling you get when you know something is wrong, and all those old memories came rushing back. I forced myself to get up and check around the house. Everything was completely normal and calm. I haven't heard it again since that night, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still following me. I just never know when it's going to happen again.
Grandpa's old car. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time out on my grandfather's land. Somewhere out in the overgrown weeds on the edge of the property, there was an old, rusted car body that had been sitting there for years. It was completely stripped down, missing its windows and just swallowed by the tall grass. It was a fun place to play during the day, but I always felt a little uneasy around it when it started getting dark. That summer, I started noticing something strange. The first time I saw the person sitting inside the driver's seat, I didn't think much of it. I just figured it was another adult, maybe a neighbor or a friend who knew my grandpa, just taking a break or looking at the old junk. I didn't want to bother them, so I just went back inside the house and brushed it off. The next day, I went back outside to play. At first, I looked over and the car was completely empty, so I didn't think about it anymore. But later on, I happened to look up again, and there the person was, sitting in the exact same spot. This time, it felt too unusual, even for a naive kid. Nobody just sits perfectly still in a rusted-out car shell like that for days. I got that horrible gut feeling that something was completely wrong, and it freaked me out enough to run back to the house to get my grandpa. He came out to check on it with me, walking all the way over to the old car body. But when we got there, the car was completely empty. There was nothing inside but dust and rust. My grandpa told me I was just letting my imagination get the best of me, and that old junk can look weird from a distance. I stopped playing near the car after that, but I never could shake the feeling that someone was still out there.
The mirror. One day on my way home, I saw a sign for an estate sale and decided to stop on a whim. While I was looking around, I found this beautiful antique mirror that I just had to have. It had the most intricate details carved into the frame, and it looked like a high-quality piece that would fit perfectly in my hallway. But almost as soon as I brought it into my home, things started to feel wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept thinking I saw movement inside the glass, like a shadow shifting just out of view. Along with the movement, a strange heaviness settled over me. I started to feel physically unwell and incredibly agitated for no real reason, just constantly on edge in my own house. It all came to a head one afternoon. I stopped to look in the mirror, and the reflection staring back at me wasn't right. My own face looked completely angry and strange, distorted into an expression I would never make. It startled me so much that I took the mirror down right then, carried it out to the garage, and threw a heavy sheet over it, just so I wouldn't have to look at it anymore. But putting it out there didn't fix things. Almost immediately, the garage started to feel unnaturally cold, a deep chill that didn't match the weather outside. Then the noises started. I would hear loud crashes from inside the garage, and when I went out to check, tools and boxes had been violently thrown completely across the room.
The mirror was still under the sheet, but the whole space felt dangerous. I finally had enough. I loaded the mirror into the back of my car and took it straight to the dump. I didn't want to sell it or leave it on the curb where someone else might find it. I watched them throw it away, making absolutely sure it was destroyed so no one else would ever bring it into their home.
Thanks for listening to Ghostly Tales. If you enjoyed these stories, please leave us a review. It helps more listeners find their way into the dark. We'll be back next Wednesday with more tales.